Okay. Well, I became licensed as a psychotherapist back in the mid 1970s and never dreamed that I'd be doing anything like this. I was doing pretty standard therapy work, and that was very rewarding. And then in the mid 1980s, by that time, I had become convinced that we have many previous lifetimes. And so I started 5 years of training as a past life regression therapist. And that was extremely interesting work. I'm still doing past life regressions. And then in 1991, the first person came to me who had had lots and lots of visits, encounters with unusual beings who were not human beings. And they were beings from somewhere else in space. In other words, extraterrestrials. And with that first person who came, we did 6 regressions to those experiences. And she went from being extremely frightened and traumatized by these visits to feeling good about them, believe it or not. She actually came in for her last session saying, "Oh, I feel privileged and honored that these unusual beings have chosen me to visit." And she was looking forward to more of their encounters. So that gave me courage to be open to working with anybody else who might come, not expecting that anybody would. But as it turned out, there have been more than 2,000 additional people, including you, Tyler.
Yes, I'm honored.
Who come for regressions to their extraterrestrial encounter experiences. And some of those people have been able to come quite a number of times because they lived geographically within an hour or so of where I am in California. And so some of those people came for 20 regressions or 30 or 40 or 50 or even 60.
Oh my gosh.
Office. And so it's been about 3,800 regressions to extraterrestrial encounters that I have conducted. And with every single person, I just feel so honored and privileged myself to assist them in knowing what has been happening for them. And I've learned a lot along the way about some of these other beings and about the whole phenomenon. So my interest now, all these years later, since 1991, is just as keen as it ever was. And I keep learning new things because people keep having different experiences, and sometimes with beings that I've never been aware of before. So my knowledge about all this just keeps expanding. It's very exciting. I can totally appreciate why somebody really doubts that this sort of thing exists at all, that there are extraterrestrial beings who come and visit humans and do a variety of things with humans, because that's the way I was. I didn't think, through the 1980s, I didn't think there was anything to this. And I thought it was science fiction, to be totally truthful with you.
Sure.
But once somebody started coming and we did these regressions, and the person, the young woman in this case, the first one, and she was so convinced that this was real. These things really, really happened. And we got so many details of those encounters too. And so then I had to really open my mind. And it has been opened ever since. Of course, since 1991 too, I have been speaking at many, many conferences that deal with the whole UFO extraterrestrial subject. and I have given many, many lectures and met tons of people who've had these encounters. So there's just no doubt in my mind now, but I can appreciate why somebody would really wonder if this could be truly happening. And it is.
No, I think we both can agree to that. Especially, we all have experiences. Aaron and I, everybody, the reason we're doing this stuff is because we've had profound experiences and we want to talk about it.
Oh, yes. People have sightings all the time. I belong to one of the MUFON groups in San Diego, where I am. And very frequently at the monthly meetings, members of the group report sightings that they have had. And they don't expect to have them necessarily. They're not out looking for them, but just when driving along in the car or walking along, or really through their window sometimes, they will have a sighting of a UFO. And it always seems to be exciting. In other words, it's something that really gets their attention and makes an impact. And here in Southern California, of course, we have the Pacific Ocean very, very nearby. And many people will see crafts coming up out of the ocean, rapidly coming up and dripping off water, of course, as they're above the water, and flying off into the air and disappearing into space. Or sometimes they see a craft like a disc-shaped craft coming down at an angle and plunging very cleanly into the water. It reminds me of an Olympic diver, where they dive off the high board and go into the pool water with barely a splash. That's how it is described that these UFOs come along over the Pacific and dive into the ocean. It's quite remarkable. And not only that, but over the years, I have regressed several people who in their ET encounters were taken to an undersea facility full of extraterrestrials. And whatever happened there happened in that underground facility. So I think there's a lot more of that activity going on in our Earth oceans than we can even imagine. And then, of course, many people are taken onto the crafts which seem to fly upwards and out into space for their particular encounter experiences. And one of my clients, whom I regressed probably 10 years ago, a woman, she was taken out from inland in Southern California. She was taken out over the ocean and then lowered down to where there was a being swimming in the ocean. And he was built like a very strong, muscular human man, but he was actually quite different in looks. He was an extraterrestrial. And so she was lowered down into the ocean from a craft, a small craft in the air. And then this being who was already swimming in the ocean took hold of her and safely somehow took her down into that undersea facility full of other extraterrestrial beings. And she was perfectly safe. She didn't start to drown or anything. I don't know how he did that, but she was escorted very safely to that facility and escorted back out again into the air at the top of the ocean, and then taken by that small craft back to her home.
They probably use a similar technology that they use on the craft. It's just like an energy field that almost like displaces the water. So they're not going through the water. It's just they've created their own atmosphere essentially for the craft. I wonder if the beings themselves have some type of advancement about them that allows them to create a field that maybe someone can be safe in or they can breathe in. I don't
Well,
know. Just
that's a great point. And I've certainly wondered about this, and so has this woman who experienced it. She described the going down through the ocean um, as if it was kind of like going down through an invisible tunnel. In other words, there seemed to be air in a tunnel shaped tube like
sure, like a tube, yeah.
apparatus that she said there didn't seem to be a physical tube that she was taken down through, but that's what it seemed like because she was able to breathe in that passageway going down to the undersea facility. We went a few summers to Hawaii, to the Big Island, and helped to facilitate some workshops there. And with Joan Ocean, who does wonderful, we were having seminars, and I was doing regressions. And that's where, especially, I had the most people I did regressions with who had those undersea UFO experiences.
Yeah, and Joan actually has photographs of some of these undersea objects. Some of them look like craft, some of them look like plasma balls, orbs. Um, One of them, she said she actually was able to swim into, and that she came up out of the water, her and everybody else, and they came up out of the water. But when they looked underwater, they couldn't see their body. It was almost like it's some time anomaly or something.
Maybe.
But like they could swim into it, and their arm would disappear when they put their arm in it and they pulled out.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was really cool, and she was explaining it. It sounds fantastical, I know, but I mean, when these people are telling you the stories, and they've all the people who were there are all experiencing it together, you can feel their energy, and you can tell they're not making it up, and it's really, it'll give you chills when you hear them talking about it. Uh,
Yes.
uh, it's just
Oh,
really cool to hear stuff like that.
that's thrilling to know about. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think there are mysteries really all around us in the ocean and in the air, in the skies that we usually don't see. But when we do, it is so special. And part of that specialness, I think, is that we can't explain them. Now, we don't really know what they are, but it seems very magical, very inspiring. Yeah, in fact, I think that generally speaking, that the people who are having extraterrestrial encounters personally, they really are involved, that they are blessed in a certain way. Now, what I've just said may be disagreed with some people who have had very frightening experiences with certain kinds of extraterrestrials. And indeed, there are many different species of extraterrestrials that come here and interact with some people. And some of them seem to be more serving of themselves and seem to be investigating us and poking and probing and doing various physical things that people generally do not like and do not appreciate. And I think that we need to try to understand that. I think that there are some species that really want to know who we are and what makes us tick and what is our physiology that is different than theirs. And so they're studying us, some of these species, really studying, investigating us. And, frankly, I think that if we humans had a chance to go to another planet, some of us would want to study them, even their physiology, their physical makeup, and so forth. And some beings seem to be very, very interested in our emotions. It seems like all of the species that I have known about from these regressions, and that's probably at least 60 or 70 different species, different kinds of beings, that they don't seem to have emotion, or at least not to the vivid extent that we humans have emotion. And that seems to be a real fascination to them. In fact, some of those beings like to create hybrid beings. And one of the reasons why they like to mix their genetics with our genetics to create hybrids that live with them is because by being partly human, those hybrids would have some emotion. So some of the species have actually said in the regressions, they've said that they regret that they don't have the capacity for emotion. And they look at humans and they see that our emotions have a lot to do with our various forms of arts and music and all kinds of creativity. And that if it weren't for having strong emotion, we might not be expressing creativity nearly to the extent that we as a human species do. So some of the extraterrestrial species think that, they could really gain by having some of our components, and emotion is one of them. Another one would be, all this creativity and artistic ability that we have, that they realize that in comparison to us, their species, wherever they live, whichever planet they're on, is rather, well, plain, compared to ours. I mean, our culture is very vivid, and of course we take that for granted.
Yeah.
Music and art and dance and all kinds of expressive arts and theater acting and cinema acting, television acting, that we create these stories to entertain. Well, it seems like, from what I can tell, is that these other species don't have anything like that. And they're quite intrigued that we do. And they would like some of that for themselves. And then some of them have claimed to be very interested in our souls and what happens to our souls through a lifetime, and then what happens to the soul after we leave a physical lifetime. Of course, this is of substantial interest to many of us humans as well. So I don't know if that means that they don't know about their own souls continuing after death, or if they don't have souls. But then through other sources, through near-death experiences and channeled material from the afterlife, shall we say, it seems like that there are souls of extraterrestrials that go into that next plane. And so I have asked some people who've communicated from the other side, I've said, do you have a chance to meet souls in that realm who are extraterrestrial? And some people who have had contact with the extraterrestrials when they were alive here on Earth, they've said, yes, we can. If we look for it, if we look for them, we can find them and interact with them. I think that's fascinating. So when I get there to the other side, I would like to explore that. And then if I would have a chance somehow to communicate that back to interested people on Earth, that would be even better. I've learned too from one particular extraterrestrial who channeled for about 11 years through my longest term experience or client, this being who lives on the binary star system, which we call Antares. It's on our star maps. And he said that their whole way of life is so different from ours. And that's one of the reasons why they are interested in us. But in their way of living, a person or a being comes into life on that planet, extraterrestrial from our point of view, and that being comes in for a particular reason. In other words, there's a mission that that being knows about that he or she has chosen to do in that lifetime. And because they have a specific mission, they live as long as it takes to accomplish that mission. So some of them may take a few hundred years to accomplish the mission. And they would live, of course, a couple of hundred years in order to get that completed. And then when they feel that they have completed the mission they came from, they will tell their fellow beings, their family beings and others who know them, tell them that they have completed their mission, and then that whole group will give them a celebrative party. And it's sort of a combination of a birthday party and a farewell party, because after the party, with everybody knowing that this one is through with the mission and therefore is getting toward being through with that lifetime, the being will simply leave, will leave the body for good. Presumably that being goes into some sort of afterlife experience. But isn't it interesting? Now, some people would say that we humans do that too. And I think that there are definitely cases that we could point to where somebody has come to really do some sort of ground-breaking job here on Earth and really pave the way for something new or whatever, or just to be a success if that's what that soul had decided it wanted to do in this lifetime. And when that is accomplished, the person physically dies. So, I mean, I know people like that, including my own brother, who during their lifetime described what they thought they really wanted to accomplish. And once they had accomplished it, well, they had a heart attack suddenly or whatever and died. It's just that they're more conscious about that in this other race of beings that I've just mentioned.
And if we could all get on that level of thinking, imagine, we can view death as just a new beginning, or a completion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which is what it is.
Along with these studies about the extraterrestrials and these intriguing experiences, I've been very, very, very interested in the near-death experiences and information that is channeled back from the next realm, the afterlife. And I think it all kind of goes together as one big field of interest that
a big puzzle. It all goes together.
It really does.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many human beings do not have that perspective and suffer because of it, because they mourn the death of their loved ones and anybody they know, and they fear death, and they'll cling on to life as long as they possibly can, and that's a shame, because I think it doesn't really have to be seen that way. Yeah,
exactly.
I think there's something to learn from these other beings. Many of the beings are so unconditionally loving. They're unconditionally loving to each other in their own species, and some of them are unconditionally loving to the humans whom they have encounters with. And these humans really feel that, and they feel that lovingness, and they also realize that no matter who they have in their life, or no matter how loving their own parents or their own spouse or their own children might be, that it still does not come up to the enormous amount of really unconditional love that some of these extraterrestrial beings have. So that's not to say that all extraterrestrial beings are loving or express that to the humans they encounter, but indeed many of them do, and that is wonderful to know, in my opinion.
Yeah.
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 So
I have heard that. I have heard that a lot as well.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Some of these beings, in fact, quite a number of them, have created hybrid beings. And the hybrid beings whom I have particularly come to know and made a study of and wrote a book about with Miguel Mendonça, a wonderful man from England. We wrote the book Meet the Hybrids. And these hybrids, there were 8 of them, mentioned very, very thoroughly and interviewed in this book. They've all been hybridized. In other words, they were born here on Earth from a regular mother and regular father, born in the way that all of us are born. And so the hybridization happened in 2 major ways. In some cases, the human mother was pregnant from the human father, and during the pregnancy, the woman was taken on board by extraterrestrials and injected through her abdomen, through the wall of the uterus, and into the fetus. In other words, the fetus was injected with extraterrestrial DNA. And in the case of these women and men, these hybrids, that they were injected with a combination of 3 or more different species of extraterrestrials, not just one type of extraterrestrial. So that's the way that most of them became hybridized. And then there were a couple of them who were hybridized in a slightly different way, and that is that the mother, who was not pregnant, was taken for an encounter, taken on board, and then she had a little embryo placed inside her womb in that encounter, and that embryo had been created by the extraterrestrials by having taken eggs from the mother's ovaries previously and sperm taken previously from the human father, and then mixed with their genetics, extraterrestrial genetics and reproductive material, combining a new little embryo, which was already hybridized, and then that was surgically implanted in the human mother's womb. And so in all of these cases, the mothers carried these babies full term, and as I said, they were born in the regular way that we humans give birth to our babies. So all of these hybrid babies grew up here on Earth right from the beginning of their lives, and they didn't know, any of them, for sure that they were hybrids until they were in their young adult years, or even in one case she was age 35 before she realized. However, the interesting thing is that each one of these hybrids, when a very young child, felt very different, didn't look different, but felt very different than all the other children around them and all of their families or from anybody they saw here on earth. And they didn't know why they felt so different. And they all had an unusual amount of psychic skills. They could do telepathic knowing of what other people were thinking. And they could do healing of themselves and healing of other humans and animals as well. And they could move things with their minds. They could medically, in some cases, see what was going on inside of a person. They could see auras, of course. That was a real easy one.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had these abilities, and in some cases, they had something a little bit different physically about them. For instance, one woman had thumbs that widened out substantially at the end of each of the two thumbs. Another woman had quite a different blood consistency that the testing labs had not seen in other people's blood. Another lady had a very different bone consistency, and another one had different muscle consistency, even to the extent that she was advised again and again not to be too active and not to participate in any sports because her muscles just wouldn't be able to handle it. So, and one of our hybrid young men had one of the internal lower abdominal organs actually up in his chest area. So you see, physically there's something a bit different about most of them. Some of them might not have had those differences, but the abilities and the awareness that really kind of gives it away that there's something unusual about these people. And also, each one of these hybrids living here on Earth had, for their whole lives and still continuingly, have lots of encounters with the particular types of extraterrestrial beings who gave them their genetics. So they consider those beings their family, their true family, their real family. And in most cases, they would say to their own parents and siblings, "You are not my real family. My real family is out there in space. They're the ones I'm really part of, and my real home is out there in space."
I just want to jump in. A friend of mine, her daughter tells her the same thing. She tells her, "You're not my real mom," and she's like, "I hope you're not mad at me, but when they take me, I don't want to come back." Like, she feels more at home there.
Yes.
It's fascinating to hear her story. Sorry to interrupt. I just made me think of that.
If you would, please tell your friend who has that child that if the child or the mother or the father ever would like to talk to somebody further about that, I am definitely available.
Yeah, I will do that, actually.
Very interested. Yeah, I am meeting other people now and then who feel that they are hybrids. And we are just beginning now, I and two men are beginning a DNA testing program with the hybrids whom we know. I know of about 15 people who I consider are most likely hybrids. The 8 in the book, and then a few others, whom I've met and done some regressions with, and think there's really good reason to think that they might be hybrids. And I'm always very open to meeting more. And the more that they can know that they are hybrids, the better, I think, because the hybrids I know all have a particular mission here, and they consider themselves ambassadors between their kinds of ET beings and humanity. And they all feel that they are here to do the work that their species of extraterrestrials would really like to see done here on Earth to help humanity. So they all feel very strongly that they are here to do what they can to help humanity to evolve, to upgrade our consciousness. And that is a mighty mission. So all of these hybrids whom I know are doing work which facilitates that mission. In other words, they're teaching classes and workshops and giving lectures, giving interviews, trying to educate people about raising their frequencies. And some of them are even trying to help people evolve enough so that we can eventually ascend as a humanity to a higher dimension. These hybrids, they know that there are higher planes of existence, different dimensions, we call them, or frequencies, and that humanity would do so much better if we could go to the next higher dimension, the fourth dimension, or particularly to go to the fifth dimension from the third dimension that, of course, we live in. And we would be able to have lives like we do. And but there would be so much more cooperation and kindness and helpfulness and love and bringing about decent outcomes in the world compared to our third dimension, where we have a lot of dysfunction and negative things happening, although we have a lot of good things happening too. We're not a total loss, but a lot of these beings who have created the hybrids would really like to see a general upgrading. So these hybrids feel like one of their purposes of being here is to be a bridge, a liaison between humans and the extraterrestrials, and to educate people about the fact that these other beings of many, many types do exist on many of the other planets. And of course, they realize, as we all do, that there aren't really a large segment of the public that is really dedicated to learning about this sort of thing, about the other beings, the other civilizations, and the other dimensions. More and more people are becoming aware of all this, which I think is very good. But we've got a long way to go. And of course, we know that our governments of these big nations have not come right out and announced that, yes, all of this is true. And also, there seems to be a lot of influence toward negativity about the extraterrestrials, you know, in a lot of our movies and television series and so forth, books, etc., that there's a lot of fear that's created about the other beings being hostile and being a threat to Earth. And it may be that there are some who are a threat to Earth, but I think they are far outweighed by the beings who are very benevolent towards humanity and towards Earth, and would like to see us really get our act together and improve to a better Earth society. You know, it's very wonderful that you're doing these interviews and letting people who've really looked into it have a chance to express themselves about this. It's part of that overall education that I think we human beings really need, because this is a reality that we're not only not alone in the universe, but we're accompanied, although at a great distance, we're accompanied by an innumerable amount of different species of very intelligent life. Most of that life out there may be much more intelligent than we are, and we can learn from them and benefit from them. So it's great. The more that people know about this, I think, the better off we are. Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up to people listening to this. So the very first video I had ever seen of you, Barbara, was the one where you had the hybrids that you're talking about come on stage.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And talk about their experience as a hybrid, and they had drawn pictures of what their family looks like and what they look like and outside of the human body. That was one of the biggest catalysts in my awakening when I saw that. And when you see these people come forward, I just recommend that everybody check that out. And I know it's available on openminds.com. It's hard to find on YouTube. I can't find it on YouTube, but openminds.com, type in Barbara Lamb, and that video should pop up, and it is incredible. If you want to see these hybrids talk and tell their story, it's life-changing. It's life-changing.
That's great. I'm glad you told me about that too, as well as the audience, because that lecture I gave at the International UFO Congress, which is a really big, wonderful conference, and that was in 2016. And since then, I have never seen a replay of that lecture, but I want to very much, because 6 of our hybrids who live here on Earth had a chance to speak for themselves. In my lecture, I gave kind of a preamble about the whole thing, and then 6 of them out of the 8 were able to be there for that conference in person and say what they wanted to say about their own experience of being a hybrid. And there were some people in the audience whom I know who took photos of those hybrids, and they all had a big glow of light around their heads that showed up in the photos.
Wow.
And one of them, Cynthia Crawford, was just completely covered in the brightest white light. It covered from above her head through her whole body and below her feet, so that you wouldn't even know there was a person standing there talking. That's how much light she was glowing with.
Wow.
And other big splotches of light too showing in front of them. So there really was something going on there that was very special. They were definitely emitting a very high energy.
Have you ever been doing like a past life regression on someone, and then they like a past ET life will come up where they had a past life as an ET, like on another planet?
Yes. I've had several of those. In fact, they started happening before I even knew that there was such a thing as extraterrestrial beings. So this is back in the 1980s, when I was doing a lot of past life regression therapy. And there were several instances where somebody in the regression found themselves as a very different type of being on another planet. And oh boy, were those interesting to me. And and then in a couple of cases, the person being regressed went back to a lifetime of being an extraterrestrial being who had come to Earth to visit Earth, not to do an abduction, but just to visit Earth and see what Earth was like. And in both of those regressions, 2 different people, for some reason they could not get back to the craft that they had come in, or in one case, the craft wouldn't work and they weren't able to fly away. So what eventually happened is that they died here. And then eventually in another lifetime, they incarnated as the human that they are now in this lifetime.
Wow. Very interesting.
So the very first one that came up like that, and of course I was totally surprised, the woman who was an ongoing therapy client I had been wondering for quite a while why she always seemed to be angry, or at least very quick to go into an anger response about things. And her family and her friend would say, "Why are you always so angry?" And it was sort of a mystery to her. I mean, her life wasn't that bad or abusive, to have a lot of anger. So we did a regression one day. This was probably about 1985, and did a regression to the source of her pattern of being angry. So that was a very open question. What is the source of this anger problem you have? Expecting that she would go to something earlier in this life or maybe a previous lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is she did go to a previous lifetime, but she was a different kind of being on a different planet. The planet itself was very dull, sort of grayish brown, everything on it, not much vegetation, not much of anything. It was very plain and dull, gray brown. And she, as a being, a tall, thin being, had gray brown skin and no hair. She, obviously was not a human on the planet. And she, in that lifetime, got very bored. And she was thinking, there must be some place in the cosmos where life is more interesting than this.
Yeah.
And so she looked around and found out eventually that there was this planet, which the people on it called planet Earth. And it was a very colorful planet, blues and greens and browns and white clouds. And anyway, it looked interesting. She was able to see through one of their telescopic mechanisms somehow. And she heard that the beings on that planet Earth, had very exciting lives, very vivid. They felt all kinds of things. So she died in that lifetime. And then when she reincarnated as a human on this other planet Earth. And that incarnation happened back in the days of the sultans who ran the Middle East part of our world. Young woman with darker skin and very dark hair. And she was considered such a beauty in her teenage years that she was given by her family to the sultan of that region, given as a young bride. So she became the bride. There were other wives too, and they lived in sort of a harem situation. And for quite a while, for a few years, she was the favorite wife of the sultan and was very privileged, had all kinds of perks because she was the favorite wife among all the others. And the others were sort of envious of her, but they got along well enough. And then when she got a little bit older, several years older, another young woman came in as a younger bride. And then that younger one became the favorite of the sultan. And this one was sort of relegated to be just one of the other many 20 or 30 wives that the sultan had. And she did not like that. She was angry. she was angry and expressed that anger a lot. And eventually, she was executed because of her anger, because of her expressions of anger so frequently. So she died being angry. And
Wow, that's
that over to her.
Then she had other incarnations.
Next lives, yep.
A few hundred years ago. And then came back eventually into this lifetime as a young woman who was just angry right from the very beginning, not knowing why.
Man, that it's so interesting to hear that perspective, because a lot of our problems stem from past life traumas like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something that's been so far removed from our society that even the possibility of even having lived past lives, it's not mainstream knowledge. So
Yeah.
you may never get to the core of the problem. And I want to add also, I have blown away at how many of you've done 3,000 cases and the details that you remember. I don't know how you retain all of this stuff. I mean, it's just like a bank of information, and you're just tapping into as you're talking.
Yes.
Man, I can hardly remember somebody's name sometimes.
Well, there are certain ones that really stand out. I do remember a lot of them, and some of them I might have to look at my notes to remember. As soon as I start reading the notes, oh yeah, I remember this one.
Yeah, it just triggers something.
Just there, ready to think about again, which is because they're so interesting. I mean, the important thing really about all this, I think, is that the regression work, seems to be, for the most part, really helpful for the person. And that's why I do it, because I'm a therapist, because I want to be helpful to people. And it just happens also that this is all very, very interesting and material that I think it helps us as a society to know about this part of reality that we have not considered to be part of reality. Yeah, and people sometimes take varying amounts of time to sort of integrate what they have found out in the regression. But it always has that aspect of enlightenment to it, like oh, that's what that was about. Or that's what happened after I had that close UFO sighting. Or that's why I have those unusual markings on my body.
Yeah.
Or that's where I got the implant put in my body. Or, that's what happened during that period of time that was missing that one particular day or night. Or, that's why I keep looking up at the sky, why I've been so interested in the other planets and stars. I never knew why that was. Nobody else in my family is interested, but I am. That type of thing. There are lots of little, like little lights going off.
Yeah.
And I feel that even if the experience that somebody revisits in regression is negative, in other words, the extraterrestrial beings did some procedures that maybe they did not like having done, because that does happen sometimes with some of them. But I realize as a therapist that it's more helpful to know what happened than to live with the stress and the wondering why a person is so stressed or so anxious or so fearful or whatever. It's better to know what the reason is, and then they can deal with it. They can learn how to deal with it. They can integrate it and make more peace with it, which they couldn't do when they didn't even know, what had happened.
Absolutely.
So I think it's worth people's pursuing this. And fortunately, we have the method of doing hypnotic regression that can help a person go back to the details of one of those experiences they wonder about. And I always stress to people that they have a very strong subconscious part of the mind. And the subconscious part of the mind can be very, very helpful because it records everything that we experienced in any way. Even the subconscious mind records those things that have happened to us that we have not been consciously aware of, which is usually the case with these extraterrestrial encounters, that most of the encounter the person is not aware of consciously. But the subconscious mind is aware, and it records it and it retains it. And that's why in regression, when we go into a state of deep relaxation, which is what hypnosis is, and go into the subconscious part of the mind, that we can relive moment by moment every moment of that experience, even if the experience happened long ago, decades ago, or in a previous lifetime. And I think it's grossly unfair to characterize all extraterrestrial beings as being demonic.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for sure, there are some of the beings who do things to people that people don't like, being physically examined and poked and probed and so forth. And yet, I don't think those beings are demonic. I think that they're just very serving of themselves. They want to learn about how we are composed physiologically.
Yeah.
But even with some of those procedures that they do that seem frightening to the person, very often those procedures turn out to be actually helpful to the person, believe it or not. In other words, somebody might have one of the beings working on their brain, and it might be said to the person, this has happened a number of times with people I've regressed, it might be said to the person that we are rewiring your brain. Now, that could be very frightening if you're lying there on a table in a spacecraft and these unusual beings who are definitely not human are all around you, and they're doing something with your head, and they're saying, we're going to rewire your brain. I mean, it would be pretty hard to trust that would be okay.
Yeah.
But in every case that I know of where that's happened to a person, the person has been upgraded. The person's brain has been maybe more able to be psychic or telepathic. In other words, there's an upgrade that has happened. Or maybe with the rewiring of the brain, they now have great healing ability. And some of the procedures that are done on a person's abdomen while the person is lying on a kind of a cold table in an unusual round room with bright lights and these unusual beings, that in itself can be frightening, understandably. But very often they are being healed of some important malady that they have.
Yeah.
So a being might be coming toward them with a lighted instrument of some type, and the person might think, oh, what's going to happen? But actually it turns out that lighted wand is actually healing something internally that's going wrong with the person, that the person either did know about previously or didn't know about. So there are lots of healing procedures that are done with abducted people, and that they really, really benefit from those healings. There are some pretty spectacular ones that have come through some of the regressions I've done.
One of the things people are afraid of is the unknown. That's fear. That's just fear of the unknown. You're afraid of the dark because you can't see. You turn the light on, you're not scared. It's just that's the biggest issue. It's not that they're scared of what's happening. It's just because they don't understand what's happening. Yeah, and that's basically what you just said.
Yeah, and that's why the regressions are so helpful, because a person might have a little glimpse, a little brief flash of a memory of, big eyes looking into their eyes, big black eyes, or strange beings being around them on a table, and they're being examined to some extent, and that's of course not welcomed by those people. But if they will do a regression and get the details, and even sometimes the explanations from the beings themselves about what they're doing, it really puts a different light on it and makes the whole thing so much more not only understandable, but acceptable to the person who's experienced that sort of things. So one of the things that I find in many of the regressions, I don't remember, Tyler, if this particular thing happened in yours or not, but if the person wonders what's happening to them, why the beings are doing this particular thing, I tell them in the regression that they can ask the beings what they're doing and why. And when they do ask, they always seem to get an answer. And because the beings are telepathic, they get the answer in their minds. They don't hear it out loud with their ears. In other words, we all have some telepathic ability that we haven't really known about in most cases. But the answers given by the extraterrestrial beings really make sense. And then the person so often is grateful because they're being helped in some way. Or sometimes they find out that they are helping somebody else. In other words, one of my clients I did several regressions on, and she was in my experiencer group for 3 or 4 years. She came in one day for her regression, and she had a straight line scar on her forearm, her right forearm. Just looked like a white line, a straight line scar right there, about 2 inches long. And she knew that she had not had that the previous night, but during the night she got that scar. It wasn't bleeding or anything, and in fact it looked like it was healing quite nicely. So we did a regression to the experience of having that straight line scar put on her forearm. And what she found out during the regression was that the beings were taking a certain ingredient from that particular vein in her right forearm, and that ingredient, they said, was to help their newborns to survive. So once she realized that they weren't just doing some mean, macabre thing to her, but they were taking something from her that was helping to save some of their lives, she felt really okay about that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to be of help. And it wasn't harming her. And the scar eventually faded away. As it turned out, that woman's husband, who actually did more regressions with me, his extraterrestrial encounters, he also had an identical straight line white scar on his left forearm. They were both in my experiencer group, so I put the two arms together, and his and hers, and we compared them. They were identical, although on his left arm and hers had been on the right arm. Well, we never did a regression to how he got that scar, but we figured from what the wife had found out that it probably was to take some ingredient from that vein that was helpful to their newborns. So a lot of these species of extraterrestrials have really got into real concern and worry about the fact that they have been losing their ability to reproduce. In other words, their species is beginning to die out. And that is a very big reason for their choosing humans to create hybrids with, because the hybrids would have a better chance of living since they were part human. And those are the hybrids that I believe I mentioned earlier who are continuing to live on the ships, the UFOs, with the beings, or to live on their planets. So many people who've been realizing that they have hybrid children from these encounters, when they realize that, oh, these hybrid children are helping to save a whole race of beings, they feel better about it.
Yeah.
They feel they're they had not consciously agreed to, but that they are being very helpful to other beings in the universe.